Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name's Laura, and today we are talking about intuition. Um, so, the things that we're going to discuss, we're going to talk about what is intuition. We'll go through kind of the actual definition of intuition, but then go into a more broad kind of philosophical view of intuition. Next, we're going to discuss where do we find intuition, like in our bodies, which sounds a bit broad or strange. We'll get there. Okay. Thirdly, we're going to discuss how intuition relates to authenticity. So I'll link that video of authenticity. If you haven't watched that, you could go check that out. But to kind of sum it up, authenticity is basically us being true to ourselves. So how does intuition relate to that? And then finally, we're going to talk about how you can tap into and intentionally explore your intuition. Because I'm going to tell you right now, you got it. All right, so that's kind of what we've got going on today. I hope you're excited. So let's get into it. Oh yeah, this is purely intentional living. The first thing that we're going to discuss is, like we usually do, we're just going to define what it is that we're talking about. So, intuition. So, the dictionary definition of intuition is a thing to understand something immediately without need for conscious reasoning. And that's from the Oxford English Dictionary. So, understanding something without knowing how you understand it. It's just there. But we can define intuition in a more philosophical way as the extrasensory processing or abilities that we all innately have. So even in the dictionary definition of intuition, it's unexplainable, it's not conscious reasoning, and anybody can do it. It doesn't have to be a specific person or a specific type of individual. It just happens, and that's the way it is. So when we talk about intuition, we could be talking about lots of different things, or we can name it through lots of different ways, right? So it goes by many names: gut feelings, women's intuition, extrasensory perception, ESP, psychic abilities or psychic gifts, and many, many more, all to talk about the same phenomenon, right? It is what it is. We don't have to call it any one thing. I personally call my intuition psychic gifts, but that might be a bit too woo for you, and it doesn't feel right, and you like gut feelings. And if that's the way you're most comfortable talking about it, then that's what you call it, and that's okay. But regardless of the specific names that we choose to talk about what we innately have in ourselves, we've all got it. And it's all the same type of thing. We experience it a little differently because we're all unique, but essentially it's the same. It's the same thing. So we see this kind of play out in nature all the time without even really realizing it. Like when we see a flock of birds all flying together and then they change direction without in unison, almost like those swim teams, the synchronized swimming. They're doing it a little differently than the birds do it. But that's like what it looks like. It's all in unison. It's all perfect timing. And you're thinking, how in the world can they make that happen? How could there be a bird call that one of them makes that they all hear instantly? Or how is it that they release a certain pheromone or chemical smell that instantly reacts? Like, I don't think that's how that works. But we also see it with a school of fish. If there's like a predator around, they will clump together in a ball and move in unison. They do that because they're stronger together. They're more protected as a whole unit as opposed to just one on their own. But how do they move in unison at exactly the right time? It's phenomenal. But that's what we're talking about. Birds have it, fish have it. You and I have this ability to tap into an extrasensory um, processing system innately in ourselves that helps us learn information about our environment. So that is, in a nutshell, what intuition is. Okay, so we've got that definition that it's unconscious or non-conscious understanding of something. It's not logical. Sometimes it doesn't even make sense. It doesn't make sense because it's not from logic. So it's a really unique way, and it's something that we aren't taught about. We aren't told that we can tap into our gut feelings and use those to guide our choices. It's not discussed, it's not talked about, it's not brought up. So there's a lot of confusion about what it is, what to do with it, and how we can utilize that for our own benefit. So that's what the definition is. Now let's get into where we find it in ourselves, like on a biological level. So, where do we find our intuition? When we talk about a gut feeling, that's got to be in the gut, right? Um, you're not necessarily wrong, but I think that's one specific way to tap into intuition. But I'm talking about like the whole body system as one working unit. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Many of you have heard that your psychic gifts, especially clairvoyance or clear seeing, is found in the pineal gland, which is like a walnut shaped gland in the brain. And again, I think that's what we're talking about. One specific way to utilize intuition is from there. But overall, I just, well, let me tell you a little story. So one night I couldn't sleep. So I was listening to a podcast. And I cannot remember which one it was or who the guest was. But the guest was a famous psychic. And I'd actually never heard of her. But she's a famous psychic. And she was talking about psychic gifts. Now, like I said earlier, I call my intuition psychic gifts. A lot of people can find that to be a bit too woo, and I understand that. I like woo. I think it adds a spice to life that's just fun. But if that's not you, again, we're talking about the same thing. If you're just talking about your gut feelings or just having a knowing or a feeling, that's your intuition. It's coming out in certain areas. But when we're talking about the whole system, I was listening to this podcast, and she was talking about how everybody has psychic gifts or intuition. And I was just thinking to myself, I was like, man, where do we find that at? I know we talk about the pineal gland, but that's just one. It's not an organ, it's a gland. But like that's just one thing. When we're talking about gut feelings, that's larger than that. That's more than that. So where is it? And I heard, not with my ears, but like in my brain, I heard the phrase limbic system. Now I have heard of the limbic system, but I couldn't directly tell you if it was a brain system, if it was a nerve system. I couldn't tell you exactly what it did. I just have heard of the limbic system, and that's what came to mind. So when I went and looked up the limbic system, it is in the brain, and that is the part of the brain that is responsible for our animalistic drives to survive and advance the species. And then I was like, oh my goodness, that actually makes a lot of sense. because again, we were talking about earlier about how we see intuition. We see in nature things that happen that is really unexplainable by logic, which again is the definition of intuition. And so when we look at that and we think about how intuition, or if we accept the limbic system as where is the main overall system for our psychic gifts or intuition as being the animalistic, like it makes sense. So a little bit more about that system. So the drives to survive and advance the species. So it's like just that innate response of wanting to eat to survive, and to reproduce. So the species continues, right? That is essentially the where I'm getting that our intuition. So like as we know, our brain and our gut are connected. There are neurons in our brain. That's where we've always known them to be. But there are also neurons in our gut. Actually, it's also called the second brain. Our gut is called the second brain because there are so many neurons there. So we know that there is a gut-brain connection through these neural pathways. And so it makes sense that when we're talking about intuition, when we're talking about gut feelings, that it's part of the same system. It's just manifesting in that particular area. I'm going to do another video that talks more about the specific areas we find our intuition, so where they manifest. So we've talked about clairvoyance. We've talked about gut feelings, which is clairsentience or clear feeling. I'll do a video where we really dive into each of those. But that makes sense why we can feel get these innate knowings in different ways through that neural system. So that is kind of, it's like stems in the brain, but it's that whole neural system that we find throughout our body that gives us these extrasensory perceptions, these just innate knowings without it being our brain that's necessarily processing them in our logic, like prefrontal cortex area. So that's like a lot of neuroscience there for you from a layman. But that's where we are going to get most of our intuition from. That's where it resides. Like I said, in the body, we can feel it in different ways. We can process it with our eyes, our ears, our gut. But we'll talk about that in a later video, so stay tuned for that one. Oh, speaking of, if that interests you, make sure you go ahead and like and subscribe. And if you're like really excited about that, you could hit that bell notification. So when I finally do get that published, probably within the next couple of weeks sometime, you'll be notified of when that happens. So just a little plug there. But yeah, that's where in our brains and in our bodies we find our intuition. So those are kind of the nuts and bolts of intuition. So now we're really going to dive into like the real philosophy of intuition. Next, we're going to talk about how that relates to our authenticity. Okay, how intuition relates to authenticity. So we're going to recap authenticity just a tiny bit to catch everybody up. Again, if you haven't seen that video, go check that out. But you don't have to have seen that video to really understand this. So authenticity is us just being connected with our true selves, right? It's disregarding old programs that that we've been taught through conformity, and we separate ourselves from what we've been told is for us and really starting to focus on what we feel and what we know is true for us. That's essentially authenticity. So how does intuition relate to that? Basically, we need awareness of ourselves to understand that we are getting a message. So like that's the first part. Like if you have shut off that part of yourself that tells you when you're hearing truth or not, when we shut that off, we disconnect ourselves from subtle messages, because we've told our brain is saying that is unimportant to us, that doesn't keep us in line with the group, so we're just going to ignore it, and eventually it becomes quieter and quieter, and then we stop noticing it altogether. So we have to reconnect with our authenticity to know that we're getting a message in the first place. And then second, it is the ability to process that message. Authenticity gives us the ability to process the message. So first and foremost, it tells us, for one, that there is a message. There's some subtle energy. There's some subtle thing that our senses are, or our extra senses, that innate, non-conscious understanding of something, right? That we're getting a message, that there is something there that we know is there, but it's beyond what our conscious brain tells us is happening. But we can pick up on that when we are in touch with our authentic selves. And then through our authenticity, we can translate that message that our body is giving us, that our intuition is giving us. So we receive messages. We kind of talked about it a little bit, that we get it in kind of different ways, and it works a little bit differently for everybody. But because of who we authentically are, really relates to our personal experiences and then our perceptions of those. The way we receive messages are all a little bit different. And again, when you're in touch with your authenticity, that difference is something that you're okay with. So when we're detached from our authenticity, not only are we ignoring messages and ignoring them so much that we stop getting them, even if those messages kind of come through, we definitely, it makes us different than other people, because again, we all receive them a little bit differently. And when you're in conformity, when that is your identity, you don't want to be separate from that. Because it's a threat to your survival. Again, we talked about that in that authenticity video. So that's why authenticity is so important for intuition. We all have it, but we have to really be connected to our true selves to really benefit from these subtle messages that our environment's giving us. Because like I said, there can be no conformity. We all have unique experiences. We have unique perceptions to those experiences. So our messaging systems function a little differently for everyone. The caveat to that, though, is the messages will be the same. It's kind of phenomenal. I don't know if I'm sure you've experienced this at some point in your life where you and a friend have been talking about just some feelings you've been having, as you can't quite put your finger on, but you're picking up the same message. Hey, there's something off with Cheryl. I think she's having trouble with her husband. Like those kinds of conversations, that's intuition working. And when you're in touch with who you truly are, you can pick up on those messages. But you might get a feeling, and your friend might just know that something's up. She just knows that there's something going on there. That's what I'm talking about. They're unique, but the message is the same. So if we can get back to like conformity, conformity is about being the same as everyone else. And a lot of the times when we're living just in with society, doing what society is telling us is what we're supposed to be doing, that is conformity. And we feel like it threatens our survival when we're out of conformity. So intuition makes us unique, and that can be scary when you haven't accepted that your true self is exactly who you're supposed to be, and who I want for you to show up to this world being your most authentic self, because that's where your truth is. But conformity is all the same, and being in touch with your authenticity and following your intuition means you're doing something very different. Only you are doing that one thing. Um, and it's been largely ignored by society. Intuition, I mean, we talk about like women's intuition and gut feelings, like those are common phrases that everybody's heard of, but that they stop there. That there is no further like exploration of what that means. Society disregards it by and large. For one, science doesn't really can't really explain it as of yet. So there's that component, but um, really the way our patriarchal system works, it does not support that. They are not in alignment with one another. Um, so all of that's been ignored uh, because it doesn't fit with the mold um, that we've been told we have to follow. Now, back in history, during a lot of matriarchal societies, intuition was very common and a lot more respected and cultivated because it's a survival system, um, and that was respected, and now it's not. So you have to be in touch with your truth to be able to interpret these subtle messages that your intuition is telling you. So, in a nutshell, that's pretty much why authenticity is so important for intuition. If you're not the most connected with your authenticity or not as connected as you would like to be, that does not mean that you're not able to tap into your intuition or that it's not working. It just makes it harder, and you have to practice it. You have to practice being your authentic self. You have to practice being out of conformity with what society has told you to do, and you have to practice um, understanding those subtle messages that you receive from your intuition, and practice interpreting those messages. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of work that society tells us is unimportant. And I'm here to tell you that where society is going for the future, these things are going to be a lot more respected, and they're going to be cultivated and fostered a lot more, just because it's innate. It's innately who we are as a species on this planet. Um, we see it in nature, and our society is going to a place where, again, that's going to be a lot more respected. It's going to be a little better understood, and it's going to be something that it's okay for you to be you, and for you to tap into your intuition when it's telling you something. So that's how we really see this authenticity and intuition kind of interconnect. But now we're going to talk about why you're probably all here, in finding out how you can tap into your intuition and really cultivate that innate ability. So let's get into it. All right, how you can tap into your intuition. Um, Really, there are a couple of things that you just have to accept as true to really be able to cultivate your intuition. And one of those is trust that you have the ability to do this. If you're telling yourself, "Ugh, I don't think I could do that. I don't think I have clairvoyance. I don't think I have a whole lot of gut feelings." When you tell yourselves that, um, your brain hears that and understands it that way, and that's what's going to happen. So you really have to trust and tell yourself that you can pick up on subtle energies. You have that ability. It's innate within you. It is part of who you truly are, and you trust in that ability. Now, it might seem silly to do. It might be really difficult to do, to override those old programs, but it really is a very important place to start. And being able to start picking up on these messages in a better, more clear way. Um, Let me see, because I have a whole bunch of notes written down here. Let me just check. Okay. It's also, it's really great practice for you to give this a name. If you like intuition, that's fine. If you like psychic gifts like I do, if you prefer to call them gut feelings, even if they aren't coming from your gut, whatever works, whatever feels right and best for you is what you should call them, and you should give them that name, and you should call them that. If you like the name Jedi powers, because sometimes I call it that too, if you like saying it's the Force, then do that. It serves a couple of purposes. For one, again, it adds some just fun to life, which we all need more of. But also, it is helping you be your authentic self, and honoring that. It When you say this feels right to me, this is how I want it. This is what gives me, lights up my life. Then you're being true to yourself. You're finding what your truth is, and then you're honoring that, which is both components of authenticity and intuition. Um, but but it seems silly, but it's really, really helpful. You don't have to go that route. I didn't do that when I first started to cultivate my intuition, but as I've grown into this, it's something that as I was channeling this message. So I'll talk about that process at a later date. But as I was channeling this message, that was one of the things that came up, that it would make the process go by a little quicker, a little smoother, and you'll start to pick up on what your truth feels like, what being your most authentic self feels like, and what your intuition is telling you, and reading that. It's a combination of all of those things, so it's a really great first practice in standing in your power, being your true self, honoring that truth, and again, just adding a bit of fun to your life. So like that's a good way to really start, and again, have fun with it. Call it whatever you want. The names like that aren't important. It's all the same stuff. So again, whatever speaks to you is most reflective of who you truly are. Honor that. It's fun, and it feels really nice to just be who you are, and that's something that we are very much out of practice of. So another key thing here is, remember, like, these messages won't necessarily make logic sense. Sometimes they do. Sometimes you know exactly where they're coming from. But other times you're like, what in the world? What does that even mean? Huh? Because, as our definition of intuition tells us, it's beyond our consciousness. So it's outside of our logic brain. So it doesn't always make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, that's okay too. It doesn't have to. Just say, huh, that's a weird message, but there it is. And like, you don't necessarily have to even do anything with it, but just acknowledging that it's there, that you received it, that's what it said. You are only human. You don't know what to do with that, but there it is. That's another big practicing point, is to remember that it doesn't need to make logic sense for it to be a real intuitive message. And intuition is really trusting your authenticity and honoring that. All right, it really, really is. So that's why that naming it exercise is really important, because it's a good first practice on practicing that intuition, or practicing being your authentic self, and practicing honoring who you truly are. It really is those two things. And when you start to do that, for one, you'll do it more and more. It'll become easier. But that will really help you tap into all of this extra perception that we all have. It'll really start to, you'll really start to notice a shift. This is kind of a quick, long process, which, again, that doesn't really make sense, does it? Quick, long, that's ridiculous. What I mean by that is, as soon as you start to intentionally practice this stuff, you're going to start quickly, you'll start to notice things. You'll notice that you get more feelings. You'll notice things more often. It'll start to happen pretty quickly. They'll be very subtle though. They're very quiet messages at first, because we're out of practice with listening to them. We ignored them for so long. When we shut them down, we said, you're not important, so we're not going to listen to you. And just like if you would say that to a child, it would take a long time for the child to have the confidence to speak their truth, right? It's the same thing. You've got to really give that trust some practice and give it room to trust you back. It is really what it is. So it's quick in that way, but it's a long process. It's a long process. You won't see the immediate results that you're imagining you'll get right away. That might take, I don't want to discourage you, that might take years. It depends on a lot of different factors. Of course, the timeline, again, is our unique experiences and our unique perceptions and our perspectives, and that's unique, and so everybody's timeline is different. So you kind of get to choose how long this process takes, just in your attitude, your approach, and your willingness to trust. But it does. It's a long, years-long process to really cultivate that. You can't grow a business overnight. It takes a long time, but you can see gains very quickly. So I want to encourage you to focus on the small wins, because that's really where it is. And the more you trust in those, the quicker this whole process is going to be. But we're never a completed person, right? I mean, we're constantly learning, we're constantly growing and evolving. So your intuition is always going to be growing and evolving too. So it's never even an ending process. It's a process that you choose to practice for the rest of your life, because it benefits you. So go in with kind of minimal expectations. Like if you go in just saying, hey, all I'm looking for is to better understand myself, that's a great expectation. Because when you place too, you want to be able to talk to ghosts in 2 days. That's not really how that works, and you'll be disappointed. So the fewer expectations you have, the less disappointment there will be, and the less kind of negative feelings you'll have to overcome. So just having small, realistic expectations of what you truly want, you'll go much further in a shorter amount of time when you just let the process happen. What else do I want to go? So it really requires practice. Like I said, you have to choose to practice. You have to choose to be humble and just be yourself. A next place to go, a good place to go after that, after the naming exercise, and again, really cultivating your authenticity, a really good place to go next is by, again, we're starting small, because when you start too big, things feel overwhelming and disappointing for the most part. So by starting small, it gives us so much more room to grow, and it doesn't feel so overwhelming. So after you practice naming your intuition, what we could do is start by saying phrases like, I imagine, I believe, I trust. Um, because now the I imagine I did not come up with myself. I watched a psychic medium on YouTube. Her name's Susan Lynn. She does a lot of like political stuff, and that's not necessarily what I'm talking about. But she has a lot of videos on basically all of this stuff, how to practice psychic gifts and things like that. And I really enjoy that content. So I got this from her, but then it really kind of expanded, and you don't have to necessarily just use that. Imagination is kind of really important when we say things like I imagine or I believe or I trust. We know that that means that we're not logically thinking, like we're not using our logic brain to process through this stuff. So it gives our brains permission to kind of check out and to let, again, our imagination explore this other world that's beyond our five senses. Um, we're really playing mind games with ourselves here because, again, we have all this old programming telling us that life has to be this way, and if it's anything different, it's weird, it's not real, or it's demonic, or I mean, it all kinds of terrible things. So we're really, it's so hard for us to do these because all of these years of having another experience or another kind of it like the way society has shaped our inner monologues really affects how we process through this, getting out of that old paradigm and into this new one of being authentic and really living our authentic selves through our intuition. But anyways, so start with saying phrases like I imagine. So what does that look like for you? That could look like you just saying, hey, I imagine the color of my bedroom to be, and say whatever color comes to mind. You might get 15 colors that come to mind. That's okay. Sometimes we can get a lot of different things because we're still trying to think logically. It's okay. Say they're all those colors. It's fine. If you write the stuff down, that will help you. For one, it will help you remember it, and it will help you like be able to track over time your progress. So like there's a couple different things to reasons why we like to write stuff down. I do love to write things down. Like I've got all of these notes right here in front of me, and I always do. But I don't really write that stuff down a lot. The only time that I really write down that stuff, like here recently, I have been writing down my channelings. Whenever I channel a message, I do write that down. But when I practice my intuition, I really don't, and I really should. But it's okay. It's okay. If writing stuff down is not your thing, that's fine. You won't have like a record of, how far you've come, but you'll know. So, if that's not your thing, that's okay. But it does help. It does help, and it is helpful. So depending on which message is the strongest for you, so you might want to imagine a color. So that's more of like a visual. If you're like more of like you're really into music, you love hearing things, you could say, I imagine if my bedroom were a theme song, I imagine my bedroom would be, there it is. And every song has a message, an underlying message in itself, and that will be the message that you get. Or you could say, color, let me say, again, I've got all this stuff written down. Emotions. So clairsentience, that gut feeling, is one of the most common forms of intuition. It's the one that's probably societally accepted the most. Just not emotions necessarily, but just like having a feeling. It feels weird. It's got a weird vibe. Like those are all really, really common phrases, and you can commonly say them to anyone, and they'll know what you're talking about, even if they might phrase it differently. So you could say, like, if I were to name an emotion for my bedroom, that would be, again, these different phrasings help us tap into different areas. So if you want to practice making an area stronger, so for example, with my psychic gifts, my strongest one is claircognizance. That's why I write down my channels, because it's the epitome of intuition. It's knowing without knowing how you know. So I have to put that down on paper. It's not like I'm hearing it and can relay it. It's a thought that I've got to put down to differentiate my thoughts from those thoughts. But if I wanted to practice my clairsentience, that feeling, I would talk about it. I would practice by saying, I believe, because I do believe more than imagine personally, but do whatever works best for you. But I would approach it by saying, I imagine the emotion of my patio is cheery, is jovial, just is happy. That's how I would describe that emotionally. And that's kind of tapping into that gut feeling, that the kind of emotional connection. You could practice with smells, or if you're really into food, if you're like a foodie, so taste is a thing. Like, if I were to imagine this space as a flavor, it would be citrus. I mean, like, you can play with it however you want. Whatever feels the silliest but funnest thing is how you should approach it, because again, you're honoring that part of yourself, you're honoring who you truly are, and it's helping you tap into that intuition that you didn't even realize you had. So that really there's something that brings up something that I really want to talk about, is there are lots of different ways that we have intuition and lots of different ways that we can express that. So I really want to talk about what that looks like for you specifically. Okay, so what does that mean for you? Something I never realized was how unique all of this presents itself. I always thought that people who were clairvoyant, clear-seeing, physically with their eyeballs saw something. That can be true, but it also means seeing a picture in your mind or having any kind of visual. When we were talking about colors earlier, that's visual. So therefore that is tapping into that clairvoyance. So when you see things inside your mind, again, if like you just get a color that pops up, you get an image that shows up, you are reminded of a book cover that you saw one time. Those are all ways that you can experience clairvoyance, clear seeing. It doesn't have to look the exact same for everybody. It's not going to, and that is 100% okay. And that's something I never knew. Like, I thought if you were clairaudient, you actually heard with your ear holes a noise, or you heard a voice. Sometimes it is you just hear things in your mind that sounds like your own voice. Like when I heard the limbic system, when I told you that I heard the limbic system, what I heard was in my mind, in my own voice, of like the voice of my inner monologue. That voice, I heard limbic system. I've practiced enough to recognize that that was an intuitive message. But we can dismiss that a lot. Sometimes it's a voice inside your head that sounds like somebody else's voice. that happens too. So it could be one or all of these things that you experience that is part of the way you receive those intuitive messages. Again, it's unique. How you get that message is how you get that message. And it might be so different than anybody else, and that is 100% okay. And that's still intuition, and that is still a psychic gift or Jedi powers, or again, whatever you honor that name of what you call your intuition. That's exactly what that is, and that's exactly how it presents to you, and that is what is most meaningful for you. And again, that's something I did not realize until very recently, that was really how that worked. I always, especially watching like any kind of paranormal shows on TV where they have the psychics come in or whatever, um, a lot of those people do experience it in a very like visceral way. Like they see it with their eyeballs, they hear it, um, they hear the voice of the other, usually it's a ghost of the that ghost in their head or whatever. So that's just what I thought. So I was like, well, that's not my experience, so therefore that's not me. I don't have those same kind of ability, the same way to tap into those kinds of things. um, and I'm not saying we're all mediums, because that's a different section. That's just the closest thing that I can share with you. Like, we're on TV, we're in real life. I've commonly seen these kind of gifts play out. Um, so I'm not necessarily talking about mediumship, but mediumship comes from psychic abilities and or intuition. And so I'm telling you that what you have seen might not be your experience, but that doesn't mean that you don't have the same capabilities or abilities that that person does. It just means that yours look a little different. And I'm here to tell you that that is okay. That's the way it's supposed to be, actually. Um, oh, yeah. So I dismissed them as my imagination. And when you think, oh, that's just my imagination, going back to what we were talking about, a good way to practice is saying, I imagine. Your imagination is your perception of the other world, the world beyond the physical 3D world that we have around us. So I dismissed it as, oh, that's just my imagination, instead of honoring that imaginative part of my brain as being intuition. And that was something that, again, I just realized very recently. And I've been practicing this for a little while now, a couple of years. I've been intentionally practicing it. And I'm just now realizing a lot of this stuff, which is why I'm sharing it with you, because I would like for you to move at a quicker rate if that's what you're ready to do. So I'm just want to reaffirm that the way it happens for you is your way, and that is the way it is supposed to be. Now, to kind of recap everything, intuition is a low conscious understanding of things. In a philosophical way, it's using extra sensory perceptions to receive messages about our environment that are beyond our five senses. We find this in our brain gut connection, in these neural pathways throughout the body, so they can be presented in different ways. So through feelings, like gut feelings, through visuals, through hearing, through smell, through taste, through feel, all of these different ways, we can tap into our intuition, because of that neural pathway system. We really can't fully understand our intuition until we get in touch with our authenticity. It's really important for us to find our truth in ourselves and honoring that. And then by doing so, we'll really start to connect with with that intuition, with those intuitive messages that we're getting, and then be able to interpret those messages. There are many different ways that you can go about practicing this, but it starts first of all with trusting and believing, telling yourself that you can do this, that you have strong intuition and the ability to interpret those messages, and trusting in that. It's a process of trusting your authenticity and honoring that. You can start by naming your intuition. But like I said, I call mine psychic gifts. Sometimes I call them my Jedi mind tricks or Jedi powers. Just depends on what kind of mood I'm in. You might like calling them gut feelings. You might like sticking with the term intuition. But that is in itself a way of practicing your authenticity and honoring those intuitive messages. Then after that, you can begin by stating things like I imagine, or I believe, I trust, blank, fill in the blank. You can start with the environment that you're in, a specific room or your house. You can go outside this space. I imagine this space to be the color of. So whichever way you naturally lean. So if you naturally want to give it a color or give it a visual, lean into that when you're just starting. If you're ready to expand, move on to one that so like my biggest clair is my claircognizance. Then my second is probably clairaudience or clairvoyance. To kind of elevate those, I could practice by saying, if I were to imagine that my patio here was a song, it would be Here Comes the Sun by the Beatles. That would be a way of kind of practicing clairaudience. I hear those lyrics playing out in my mind, and that is clairaudience. So you can use it if you're just starting out, or if you're ready to expand, you can use those same phrases and those same practices to really expand your portfolio of intuitive messaging systems. And finally, the way you experience them is 100% truly intuitive messages and intuitive gifts. We're taught to disregard our imagination and disregard our intuitive messages. So they're going to be quiet at first. You're really going to have intention with them and intentionally practice them. But by choosing that, you are choosing you and you're honoring you, and those will develop over time. And how they show up for you is 100% how they show up for you. And that is just as valid as mine or anyone else's. I think that pretty much sums up intuition today. I hope you got a lot out of it. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, or if you want to share your experiences, like how does your intuition show up? If you want to share what you like to call your intuition, whatever you want to share, I'd love to hear from you and kind of collaborate and really grow this community of like-minded folk who just really want to, again, step into their authenticity and be seen for who we are. Anyways, thanks so much for stopping by today. Like, subscribe, all of those things. I really appreciate it. For one, it lets me know that you're enjoying the content, but then also it kind of can guide me and say, yeah, I'm like on the right track doing these things. It's nice. Plus it helps with the algorithm, so it can reach more people who are ready to hear this kind of message. But anyways, thank you guys so much for being here today. Thank you for watching to the end. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you. And I am so grateful that you have spent this time with me today. And again, if you have any questions on like specific practices that you could do, or you want to relate any kind of experiences you have, I would love to hear from you. So until next time, I hope you're intentionally choosing to live your authentic and intuitive self.